From the United States Senate race between United States Senator Lindsey Graham and Jaime Harrison to the first congressional race between United States Congressman Joe Cunningham and State Representative Nancy Mace, I talk one-on-one with former Charleston County Democratic Party Chairman Brady Quirk-Garvan for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Brady Quirk-Garvan, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much, Quintin. It's an honor to be here and just excited to have another day and get to spend a little time with you.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Obviously, you're the former chairman of the Charleston County Democratic Party. And just recently, I know you've been tweeting a lot and I've been keeping up with your tweets in anticipation of this particular interview. But you said this just recently. You said this quote, "1 week left. We know that some folks will end up standing in a long line on election day. That's why we're working with the folks at D. Alessandro's Pizza. I'm bad with pronunciation, to provide pizza in Charleston, Berkeley, and Greenville County. Join us today. Why pizza? Why elections?"
Yeah, it's a great question. And, today we are 1 week from Election Day. And one of the things that we know, and not in any sort of partisan way, but more people are voting this year than ever before. We know that across the state, more people are going to turn out to vote this year, which is a great and wonderful thing. But as more people vote, we tend to see more lines and for it to take longer for people to vote. So as I was talking with the guys at D. Alessandro's Pizza, I love their food myself. And we just figure if people have to wait in line, why not do something fun and creative? And so they have, obviously, their shop in downtown Charleston, but they've got one up in Somerville and one in Greenville. Right. So as we talked to them, we said, let's see if we can, get together and try and, distribute some pizza to folks who have to wait in line on Election Day. So we're excited about it and just figure it's a way to try and give back a little to folks who are willing to get out there, go vote, and if they have to wait in line, might as well be full and well fed.
And you also posted this to your Twitter page, which is a repost from a Post and Courier article. You said this: record-breaking voter turnout in South Carolina brings some growing pains with absentee voting. What are the growing pains with absentee voting as you know it?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we've seen this year, obviously the legislature changed the rules to say that anyone could vote early. You don't need a reason anymore. And so we're seeing a lot of people who are choosing to vote by mail and even more people who are choosing to go vote early. And here in Charleston, it's not just being able to vote at the Coliseum. There's the downtown library and the Seacoast and West Ashley and Mount Pleasant. So what we're seeing is a lot more people voting early, and that's a great thing for democracy as a whole. But the growing pains are that the County Board of Election is having to send out a lot more ballots. They're having to receive them, keep track of them. And that's just a big administrative hurdle. I think they've done a great job with that. But the growing pains are just, with any sort of operation, if last year you were sending out 100 ballots and this year you're sending 1,000, there's some growing pains in how you sort of scale that up. But I think they've done a great job to the best of their ability to make that smooth. And
you probably might not know this, but obviously you're a former chairman of the Charleston County Democratic Party. But looking from the voter registration standpoint, how many applications have been rejected or sent back to people?
Yeah, so the good news is that there's not a lot of them. In terms of applications, anyone who has applied for a ballot is eligible to get one. There's no longer, in previous years, you had to sort of prove or say why you needed to vote. You don't have to this year. And so everyone who's asked for a ballot has been able to vote. And from the reports that I've heard, everyone who's showed up to vote in person that was a registered voter has been able to vote just fine at the early vote locations. And I think that's one of the good things this year is we're seeing people feel both the freedom and the encouragement to go vote early, and there's really nothing to encumber them from doing that.
And obviously the headline reads this: record-breaking voter turnout in South Carolina brings some growing pains with absentee voting. What are the growing gains?
Yeah, so the growing pains and the growing gains are just that we're seeing so many more people participate early. What we're used to is that there's a lot of people who vote on Election Day. Right. And what we're seeing now is that Election Day is really more like election week or two, the last week or two. So what it means is both the gains are that folks are able to vote early in that way if they have to work on Election Day or something comes up and a kid is sick and they can't make it to the polls, they've already gotten to participate and vote. The growing pain side of that is, for the election commission, they've got to hire people that won't just work on election day, but will work the 2 weeks beforehand or the 4 weeks beforehand. So there's some pains in having to hire more staff, but also the gains in being able to have more people participate in our democracy.
Now, have you been able to talk to Joe Debney about how many people they've hired thus far?
Yeah, I've talked to Joe Debney a few times. I don't know specifically how many people they've hired ahead of time, but what I do know is that they've hired over 1,000 poll workers for election day. And for folks who don't know, in the past, the county has had 800 or 900. So they've already hired over 1,000. I don't know what the end number will be, but they're scaling up their operation, which is both exciting and something I think that's needed. We've seen in past years that there's some locations where the lines were too long or there wasn't enough equipment. And so Joe Debney's done a really good job of trying to anticipate that and hire more people proactively. And again, there are well over 1,000 people that they've hired for election day itself.
And let me ask you just a simplistic question. What else is needed?
I think that's a really good question. It's not simplistic because it's really important. I think what else is needed is two things. First is that people need to go vote. What we know is that even though more and more people are voting, there's still a large swath of folks who are registered to vote who aren't yet motivated to go out. So I think that needs to happen. And the second thing I think is we need to make some of these changes permanent, Quintin. One of the things that we've seen is that people want the ability to vote by mail or vote early. They've taken advantage of it, not just because it's this pandemic year with COVID, but because it's a safe, easy, and effective way to make sure their vote is heard. And so one of the things that I would hope is that next year the legislature would take up these measures and say, wow, that worked really well in 2020 in the general election with our highest amount of voters ever. Let's go ahead and make that permanent and allow people to vote early in every election, not just in years where there's COVID.
And, I live here on the Charleston's east side, but let me ask you this. How many people are the Democrats are helping to motivate to vote?
Hundreds of thousands. So what we know is that, locally, the county party is spending a lot of time and money passing out door hangers, calling people, texting people. And then statewide, you've got Jaime Harrison and the Democratic Party who are spending unprecedented sums of money to motivate Democrats to go out and vote. And I think one of the things that we know is, we will see many more people come out to vote than ever before, because not just the party, but the candidates have really done a tremendous job of motivating people to go out and cast their ballot.
Let me take you to the upstate, because you said this actually after Jamie Lovegrove tweeted this out on October 24th. Jamie said this: Vice President Mike Pence will speak at a Trump campaign rally in Greenville on Tuesday afternoon, per release, obviously today.
Yes.
And you said this quote, let's translate. South Carolina is not a solid red state. The national Republicans are worried Graham could lose given the huge gains Democrats are making along the coast and need to shore up their base. They're giving up on Mace. Let me ask you this, Brady. Obviously, those huge gains are making Democrats are making here along the coast. Where exactly are they?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things we're seeing is Charleston has historically been a Democratic county and is getting more Democratic. But where those real gains are happening along the coast, we're seeing is down towards Beaufort and Hilton Head and Berkeley and Dorchester County. And I think one of the things that folks will probably be talking about after this election is when J.A. Moore and Crystal Simmons won their districts in 2018, some people were a little surprised about that. But what we're seeing is that those areas along the coast, including Berkeley and Dorchester County, are becoming less Republican and trending towards Democrat. So I think what we're going to see is Berkeley, Dorchester, and down towards Beaufort become much more Democratic this go around.
Matter of fact, Shakur Francis said this on his Twitter page. He says this quote, listen, I'm here to tell you that Berkeley County is no longer a solid Republican county. How can Democrats continue to make that particular county solid Democrat?
Yeah, a really good question. I think there's two things. One, the most important thing is to run quality candidates. So when we've got folks like Catherine Whitaker, J.A. Moore, Crystal, like those are quality good candidates that are going to motivate people. And I think the other thing is the Berkeley County Party and the state Democratic Party need to invest more time and effort there. One of the things we know is that 10 years ago, there was a lot of investment in Charleston to making Charleston turn into a Democratic county. I think we need to bring that same energy and passion to turning Berkeley into a Democratic county. And I think that will happen.
And where do you start?
Where do you start? Well, I think you start with two things. One is registering people to vote. We know that Berkeley County is one of the fastest growing counties in the state. I don't think it's the fastest, but it's growing very quickly.
Yeah.
And so making sure that when people move into the county, you're there to say, hey, we're here with the local Democratic Party. We'd love to register you to vote. Voting is a critical part of participating in your local community. Here are some of our candidates, and engaging people as they move into the district, I think, is where you start.
And let me go to State of the Union, CNN State of the Union. Obviously, Chief of Staff of the White House, Mark Meadows, said this on CNN, quote, "We're not going to get control of the pandemic." He says he will instead try to get therapeutics and vaccines rather than try to control the spread of, obviously, this virus. You said this on your Twitter page, quote, "They're just giving up. Unbelievable. The Republican Party has become an anti-science, pro-death party. Don't forget that when you go to vote." What else should you not obviously remember when you go to vote?
Well, I think the two things I would remember is one, that everyone should vote. You know, that voting is critical and makes a big difference. We know that there are seats, not the presidential race, but there are local seats that will be decided by a couple dozen votes. So your vote matters a lot and is very worthwhile to go do. But I think the other thing that people should remember is that when you're voting for a candidate or looking at who the candidates are, you're entrusting them with their judgment. You don't know what will come down the pipe in a year or 2 years. You're trying to determine who's going to make the best decisions when problems come up. Because one of the things we know is nobody saw COVID happening 2 years ago, 4 years ago. Nobody had ever heard of COVID. But the leaders that we have are now responsible for making decisions about our everyday lives and how we get through this pandemic. So what I think about when I go to vote is, who do I entrust to make solid decisions when the next problem comes up? Because we may not know what it is, but we know that there will always be hurdles we have to overcome. And I think it's important to think about who's going to best make those decisions to move forward.
And what are the Democrats doing as far as decision making as far as COVID?
Well, I think we're seeing a couple of things. One, Democrats have been relentlessly focused on two things. One is the need for small businesses to stay afloat. We know that small business is the backbone of America. It's what employs most people. It's the literal heartbeat of our economy. You know, it is really important to make sure that small businesses stay afloat. But I think the other thing is what Democrats are saying in terms of COVID is we need to listen to medical professionals. You know, I am not a doctor, but I trust doctors. And so when doctors say that having a mask ordinance in place would save tens of thousands of lives, that's something that Democrats hear and say, let's do that. And I think that's what Democrats are doing, is saying, because this is a medical and a scientific problem, let's listen to the experts and do what they suggest.
And what else are you listening to as far as science?
Well, I think in terms of the science, we're listening to two things. One is that we know that mask ordinances work. We know that wearing a mask is something that prevents the spread of the disease, and it's highly effective and relatively low cost to implement. I think the other thing is that when a vaccine comes along, we need to encourage people to go ahead and get vaccinated. And I don't know when that vaccine will be. It could be in 3 months, it could be in 6 months, it could be in 8 months, but whenever it comes and the CDC has signed off on it, we know that vaccines are super effective and need to encourage folks on that front.
And as a matter of fact, you also said this on Twitter, Donald J. Trump has given up on containing the virus. How can the Democrats contain the virus right now and help him?
Sure. I think that the way that everyone, regardless of party, can help contain the virus is two things. One, wear a mask when you're out in public. You know, it's very simple. Just wear a mask when you're out in public. And the other is lessen the amount of contact you have with other people unless it's necessary. I miss my 2-year-old, her birthday was in July and we didn't have a big party. That was sad for me, but we didn't want to contribute to the spread of the disease. So I think people need to think about their personal actions and say, I'm going to wear a mask and cut down on unnecessary contact.
And when you look at the president's personal actions as a recent, when it comes to COVID, what goes to your mind?
What goes through my head is that, in my head, President Trump does not care and thinks he's above the law and above science. He doesn't see a need to wear a mask. He doesn't see a need to use his authority as the president to try and stop this spread. It's really disheartening from a leadership perspective to see someone who could be working towards a solution basically give up and say, I'm not going to do anything about this. So for me, that's disheartening.
And let me turn to another issue. You said this too on your Twitter page, that is, the generational shift that is going to happen in politics over the next 5 years is going to be staggering. Where's the generational shift here in the Low Country right now?
Yeah, well, the generational shift, I think, is starting to happen already. So here in Charleston, for instance, we saw Marvin Pendarvis step up and run when Seth Whipper retired. That was a big generational shift that has been great for the Low Country and for the district. And I think we will see more of that as we look at some folks. Again, David Mack is not running for re-election this year. And, Seth and David were people who, when I first got into politics, were mentors of mine and incredible leaders in the party. And that generational shift to Marvin and Dion is significant. And I think we're going to see that in other seats as well over time.
And you're talking about Dion Taylor, who's tapped to replace, obviously, David Mack in 109.
That's
you also
right.
said this too, and let me reread that again. The generational shift that is going to happen in politics over the next 5 years is going to be staggering. How staggering will it be here in the Low Country?
I think it'll be staggering in the Low Country, but it's not just the Low Country. So, I think that if we look over the next 5-10 years, we're likely to see a change in the mayor in North Charleston. We're likely to see a change in Congress. And I think one of the reasons I made that statement was next year we'll also redraw district lines. And so one of the things that we know is when that happens, there's usually some shift in sort of who's running for what seats. And so I think that we'll see some pretty major changes, both on the federal congressional level, but also on, again, North Charleston mayor and other seats like that.
How do you start preparing for redistricting now?
I wish I had a better answer to that. I think, I think how you prepare is work as hard as you can over the next 7 days for this election. And then as the General Assembly starts to work on that in January or February of next year, whenever they reconvene, trying to prepare and make sure that legislators are trying to draw fair and reasonable new lines.
What should be fair and reasonable lines here in the Low Country?
Yeah, I think one of the things that to me makes sense in terms of fair lines is to draw districts that make sense geographically when you draw them on a map. So, for instance, if you look at Chip Campson's Senate district, it runs from Ondaw through parts of Mount Pleasant, scoops a little downtown, gets, Edisto, goes. I mean, it is a crazy district that is hard to imagine anyone with a straight face saying that's a good cohesive district. So I think what you want to look for is like a district that says a state house district that is the bulk of it in West Ashley, or the bulk of it maybe representing James and Johns Island, and areas that seem like there's some connectivity between them, not these crazy drawn districts where it's hard to tell why they look the way they do.
And where's the connectivity right now?
Well, the connectivity legally is they use every loophole in the book. So, it can cross a river or an ocean or a harbor to connect them. I mean, that may be following the letter of the law, but I think the spirit of the law, Quintin, would say that to claim that you can have good representation when one district for state house goes from Beaufort to Ondaw is a little crazy. I think for state house and state senate districts, we need to look at clustering those more closely together.
What exactly are those one to watch races right now for Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are really there's a number of races, but I think the biggest races to watch are the Senate race between Sandy Sen and Sam Scardon, and the Senate race between Chip Campson and Richard Rissick. Additionally, I think Catherine Whitaker and Grooms's race is going to be very, very close, and people may not have been paying as much attention to that one. On the state house side, I think that the race between Ed Sutton and Lynn Bennett is going to be fascinating. And I think Ed has run an incredible campaign and will surprise a lot of people come election night.
Now, you talk about the close race that might happen between Catherine Whitaker and Larry Grooms. Why aren't people paying attention to that particular race?
I don't have a good answer for that. To me, Catherine has been a remarkable candidate. She has raised the money. She has put out incredible commercials and mail pieces. She's campaigned well. I think that I couldn't tell you why, but I think Catherine has run a textbook campaign and has been really great out when she's been able to be on the stump and talking to folks. But I think she's been a remarkable candidate. I couldn't tell you why, but I think a lot of people are going to be surprised come election night in that race.
And let me turn to the first congressional race. Obviously, Caitlin Burry with the state newspaper said this, quote, Joe Cunningham is one of the most vulnerable House Democrats seeking re-election in 2020, and his neighborhood has transformed into a visible political battleground. And obviously, she goes into the deep dive on how obviously the first congressional district race is unfolding. You said this, quote, honored to be a part of the story. You said this of the congressional districts, it's at its best purple district. To continue that shift, it's about finding Democrats who can show voters it's okay to vote for the candidates, even if you don't love the label. What's wrong with the label?
I don't know that there's anything wrong with the label, but I think there's a lot of voters in the middle. So I think about it this way, Quintin. There's probably 30% of people who say, I'm a Republican, just going to vote for every Republican. And there's 30% of people who say, I'm a Democrat, I'm going to vote for every Democrat. And then there's this 40% in the middle who may tend to lean towards one party or another, but they don't love the label. So I think about this. We have a family friend who calls himself an independent.
Okay.
And he, was a big fan of McMaster. He, supported Nikki Haley, but loves Joe Cunningham. So for him, the label of which party you're with isn't as important, but he really respects the work that Joe Cunningham has done and the campaign that he's run. And so he supported him. So that's what I mean there, where people are drawn to the candidate because of the work that they've done. And it's how do you draw that middle 40% towards your candidate? Each party will probably always have about a third of voters who just love them and support them no matter what. But it's how do you draw that middle swath to your side?
What is that middle swath looking like now?
It's changing a lot, Quintin. It's a lot younger. I'll tell you, what we see is that I don't necessarily mean 18-year-olds, but,
right.
People who are in their late 20s, early 30s, that voting block is increasing. And in the Low Country in particular, that is a block that has really been drawn to folks like Mary Tinkler and Joe Cunningham. They are people who see themselves in those candidates. They see themselves in these younger, hungrier candidates. And so there's been a trend towards voting for candidates like that.
What do you see yourself in those candidates? Where do you see yourself in those candidates?
Where do I see myself? I see myself in those candidates as someone who believes that we can do better, that we should always be striving for more. And that's what I see in Joe Cunningham. He says, I may not have all the answers, but I want to strive to do better for the district. And that's what I see as always trying to strive to do better.
And that obviously that the purple district, when did that happen? I mean, did anybody miss out on that one?
It's happened, I think, very very slowly over time, but I think what we've seen is that it's that combination of people feeling like the old guard in the Republican Party is not representing them. It's people moving into the district, and it's younger voters stepping up and voting for the first time, whether they're 18 or 25 or 30. There's a lot of people that are voting for the first time this year who again aren't 18-year-olds, they're 30-year-olds who are feeling motivated for the first time to step up and vote. And I think that's a demographic that has changed the first district significantly.
And how many people for the first time had voted here in Charleston County?
So we don't know that yet. They won't release those. They just tell you sort of the total people that have voted. So we won't know that until after the election. But it will be a significant sum. I don't know an exact number until they release those, though.
And I butchered the lead. I should have asked you this in the beginning, but let me talk to you about the obvious. This was breaking news last night. Amy Coney Barrett confirmed to the United States Supreme Court in a 52-48 vote. What does the 52-48 vote tell you, Brady?
Tells me that this is a Supreme Court justice who was rammed through on a partisan vote late at night, 8 days before an election. It is a seat that should not have been filled until after the election. And I think, again, even putting my partisan hat aside, I think that's a sad statement about the state of our democracy.
And let me talk to you about another race that's going on here in the Low Country that's very, very popular, Coalition for Kids.
Sure.
How effective is Coalition for Kids right now?
I don't know how effective the Coalition for Kids is right now. We'll obviously see in a week from now how they're doing. But I think what's clear is that people feel like the school board can do better and should do better. And I think you're seeing that play out in different ways. What does that look like? But I think the school board has clearly become one of the more heated races out there. And we saw this morning the Post and Courier endorsed a slate of candidates as well that matched up with those who have been endorsed by the coalition. But we will see. It's become clearly a very heated race.
And I know from my research that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you are a paid consultant for the Coalition for Kids?
Yeah, so I don't work for the Coalition for Kids. I never have.
Okay.
I work for 3 of the school board candidates who have been endorsed by the coalition. 2 of them were endorsed by the Chamber of Commerce. Okay. All 3 of them were endorsed by the Post and Courier. But I don't work for the coalition and never have. I've worked for 3 candidates that I, believe in personally on that level.
And what are those 3 candidates?
Yeah, so it's Charles Monteith, Courtney Waters, and Lauren Herderick. And all 3 of them, to me, are great school board candidates who have done a tremendous job of showing their leadership around education and their willingness to serve.
Now, how effective are these candidates with your consulting?
We will find out in a week. I have helped a number of candidates over the years. Right. Some have won, some have not. But these are 3 candidates that I personally believe in and wanted to help because I believe they'll do a great job.
What will be the state of education going forth?
Well, I think that the state of education, not just in Charleston County, but across the state and the country, is shifting dramatically, Quintin. I think, COVID really upended education. And we were thrown into this world where, in the spring, all of a sudden, everyone was just online trying to figure it out. And I think what we're going to see is trying to find a path forward that incorporates more technology, but also recognizes that, it's impractical, or at least in my eyes, it's impractical to have, 20 kindergartners sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours a day trying to learn. That's not a good path forward to learning. And so I think the real question, sort of where will we go from here on education, is how do we incorporate technology across all grades in a way that's beneficial, but doesn't discount the fact that kids need to be around one another, learning and interacting with qualified teachers.
Yes, sir. Now, obviously, your 3 candidates, Charles, Monteith, Lauren, and obviously Courtney, who I have on Quintin's Close-Ups before. How do you hope they will close the achievement gap?
Well, I hope they'll close the achievement gap in two ways. One is by listening. All three of them, to me, are people who have done a good job of listening to the community, hearing what folks have to say, and I think the other part is by taking it very seriously and investing the time and money that needs to happen to to close that achievement gap. One of the things that we know is that these problems that have been around for decades, not just in Charleston, but again, across the country in education, are not problems that just go away magically. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time and money, and bringing the community together to do that.
Let me take you to 2022. Obviously, there's going to be another governor's race. Henry Master says, I believe he's going to run again. Maybe Lieutenant Governor might
Yeah.
be running as well. Who will be ideal to run this state from a Democratic perspective?
It's a great question. I will tell you, Quintin, that I think that is going to be another very heated election. I think we're going to see a number of Democrats run for that seat. I think you will see folks like probably Mandy Powers Norrell, who ran for lieutenant governor last time.
Right.
She will probably get in. I've heard that folks like Senator Marlon Kimpson are thinking about it. I think we will see a diverse array of folks looking to run to be governor on the Democratic side. And that's a great thing. We should have a diverse and vigorous primary on the Democratic side.
Steve Benjamin, is he going to run?
I don't know if he's going to run, but I certainly have heard that name kicked around quite a bit in terms of running.
Bakari Sellers, maybe?
Also another name I hear a lot about. I think there is a long list of people that are considering it. And I think one of the things that we know too, Quintin, is that folks are going to take some time after this election to reflect on how things went once we see the results and sort of what the best path forward is.
How should they reflect on the issues in the state right now?
Well, I think the way they should reflect on the issues is basically what would they have to offer if they were governor. I think sometimes we get caught up in elections about, can I raise this percentage point 1 or 2 points or do this or that? And I think to me, Democrats are going to be looking for a governor who feels like they have something to offer the state, that they have something to contribute to bringing our state together, to enhancing the lives of all folks in the state.
What's that closing argument that Democrats are looking for from Jaime Harrison?
Yeah, I think the closing argument from Jaime Harrison is that we need a senator who is focused on South Carolina. For far too long, we've seen that Lindsey Graham is focused on getting on the Sunday morning cable shows, about being best friends and going golfing with the president, and sort of flip-flopping to try and remain in power in the DC bubble. What we need is a senator who cares about the people in South Carolina. And I think Jaime has proven time and time again that he's someone who would be focused on South Carolina first, not on DC.
Now, if Senator Lindsey Graham gets back in office, how should the Democrats work with him?
Well, I think Democrats should work with, anyone who's willing to engage in a conversation about how do we move forward? How do we provide economic stimulus when COVID is still very real and hurting our economy? How do we work with folks to make sure that people who are on unemployment aren't going hungry and getting the benefits they need? So I think it's about engaging in a dialogue with those who are willing to.
Brady Quirk-Garvan, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you, Quintin. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.